Hi friends, and welcome back for another Trinity Stamps video. This is Cassie. Today we're going to be making a Halloween card, and in doing so we need to use some Halloween stamps. So I'm going to use the brand new Flyby stamp set. I'm also going to be using the Hello Boo-tiful dies. I love this, could not wait to use that. And we're also going to be using the Leafy background, which is a part of their new Slimline stamps line, and I love that they have that. So let's go ahead and start with some ink blending. I have a card panel. This measures 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and I'm going to start with some carved pumpkin distress oxide ink. I've got my blender brushes. I'm going to start over on this right hand side because I need plenty of room for my sentiment. The next color I'm bringing in is Rusty Hinge, so I'm going to just kind of work that around the carved pumpkin. And I'm using watercolor paper just because I did want to add a little bit of water to it. And then I came back in with some more carved pumpkin to emphasize that and blend the Rusty Hinge into it. Our next color is Fired Brick, so I will bring that around that whole edge. And it always, when I'm ink blending, it always looks like a hot mess to start, but it always ends up working out when you do the blending. So we'll blend out with that Rusty Hinge again. And it's starting to work. The next color I'm going to bring in is Dusty Concord. I know, going from the Fired Brick to the Dusty Concord is a little bit of a stretch, but we can absolutely do it. And so we're going to. Just need to make sure that you blend back in the Fired Brick. So that's what I'm doing, blending in the Fired Brick, bringing in some more Dusty Concord. It'll end up evening out, and we're going to do plenty to this background, so you won't really be able to tell if it isn't a perfect blend. And then our final color will be some Seedless preserves. So I think it's cool. It's definitely an interesting color blend from that carved pumpkin all the way back to the Seedless preserves, but I am happy with it. So now we're going to stick it into our Misty, and I'm going to grab out the Leafy background stamp. See, I love this. It fits the entire front of a Slimline card. We're not going to stamp the whole thing on the card though, or the panel. We are going to do some partial stamping. So I am going to use that Seedless Preserves, and I'm just going to stamp it on I want it to be the upper edge of the card and also the sides. So I've put that Seedless Preserves all over that area. I'm going to soften those edges just a little bit with my microfiber cloth just by pouncing it onto where that color is on the edges, and then I'll stamp this down. It looks pretty vibrant at first. It will kind of subdue itself into the background a little bit more, but the nice thing about Distress Oxides is that they sit on top of whatever they've been stamped on. And so as you can tell, where it was stamped over the Dusty Concord and over the Seedless Preserves, it is definitely a little bit lighter. I do decide to bring in some black soot, and so I'm going to take my blender buddy and I'm going to just very lightly put some of that black soot all around the entire outside edge. I'm using just some purple tape on my fingers just to keep my fingers from leaving any finger marks, because the Distress Oxides, because they do sort of stay wet a little bit, I guess, you can definitely leave fingerprints if you are not careful. So again, just working that all across that edge. I have plenty of ink left over on my glass mat, so I'm grabbing that with grabbing that with my blender brush as well. Now I have to stamp my witch, so I'm going to pull her out and place her on that far right hand side. And she's cool. I love these silhouette stamps. They make for some fairly quick cards. And then I'm going to ink her up with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. It's just a nice crisp black pigment ink. So the black you see is the black you're going to get. And I'm going to stamp it a couple times. That's why I did it in the Misty. I wanted to make sure that I had good coverage. So we'll ink it up one more time. And then stamp her down. And she's a beaut. She's beautiful. And then I want to bring in those bats from that stamp set as well. So we're going to stamp those down using that same VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And we'll stamp those a couple times also. It just layers so nicely on top of those Oxide inks. Our next step is some splatter. So I'm going to take the Seedless Preserves, put it onto an ink block or a stamp block, and then use a little bit of a wet paintbrush to splatter that all over that background. It's very, very, very subtle, but when it dries, you can see it. Once I'm happy with that, I started off trying to do black soot. It definitely dried back. So I grabbed some black soot paint is what I did. So this is the distress paint, and I'm going to splatter that all over the background. And that stuff is permanent, so the way it splatters is the way it's going to dry. And then, of course, I had to use some sparkle. All right, now I have run the Hello Boo-tiful die through my die cutting machine over some black cardstock. And you could, you know, do it several times to make it a little bit more of a chipboard look, but I decided to stick with just one since this is Slimline. And don't lose the little dot to your eye. To adhere this down, I'm just going to use my same liquid glue. And my only caution to you is be very careful if you are using a liquid glue, because I am adhering this down over the top of some Distress Oxide. If any of that glue leaks out on the sides, you'll definitely be able to tell. It will be matte, but it's going to pull the color that's underneath it. So then I'll dot the eye, and then we'll do the same thing with Hello, using that liquid glue. And then we'll put that down on the top. Very happy with that. So now I have to get my card base ready. I grabbed some orange cardstock from my stash that I cut to 7 inches by 8.5 inches, and I'm scoring it at 3.5 inches. So my panel is going to fit perfectly on top of there. So there isn't going to be any of the orange showing, but I like the orange because the inside. And so I'm going to put this into my Giganta Misty. I think it's actually called a Scrapbook Misty. And I'm going to ink up the Leafy background stamp one more time, the exact same way I did on the outside. I'm using the Seedless Preserves, and I'll stamp that or ink that up and then blot away the harsh edges, and then I'll stamp that down because the Distress Oxides show up so nicely on colored cardstock. I am going to stamp the bats from the Flyby stamp set a few times on the inside. This is going to leave plenty of room to write to my recipient. But it does, you know, this way I'm at least doing something on the inside. And then I'll stamp the sentiment that says just doing a little flyby. I wasn't happy with how I had stamped the edges, so I'm going to bring in my black soot just to deepen those edges a little bit along with my Blender Buddy, and then it just kind of masks the fact that it wasn't stamped perfectly on that edge. And now we're going to adhere our card panel down to our card base using that same liquid glue. And once we are done there, I couldn't stop there. I have to add some embellishment. So I have my tiny tray filled with some Royal Velvet confetti mix, and I adhered those down using liquid glue and my jewel picker. And there you have it. So that's going to finish off our card for today. I would love to know what you think. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.